Today, lesson 15b, this is day number 2 of adding and subtracting rational numbers or fractions. In other words, adding and subtracting fractions that may be positive or negative. But today we take a look at what happens when we don't have common denominators. But, once again, this is not the first time I've said this. When we talked about decimals, I said the same thing. That as long as you understand how to deal with integers, in other words, no decimals or fractions, and as far as fractions go, if you know how to do positive fractions, this is not going to be very difficult. But you have to make sure that you remember how to do all of those things that we've talked about earlier in the year. So let's go ahead and get started. If I asked you to solve a problem like this, remember, when we don't have common denominators, we have to find a common denominator. And so we turn these into equivalent fractions that would have the same denominator. And 10 would be the least common denominator here. And when we change 1/2, or the 2 in the denominator, to 10, we also have to change the numerator. That's called equivalent fractions. So I have to multiply top and bottom by 5 on the first fraction, top and bottom by 2 in the second fraction, and then we can figure out what we need. But let's spend a little bit of time talking about common denominators, because I still notice too many of you who pick denominators bigger than what you really need. And it's okay to do that. It's just that if you do that every single time, you're going to ensure that every single time you will have to reduce. And that doesn't mean you won't have to reduce if you pick the smallest common denominator, but you're less likely to have to do that. So let's take a look at number 1. I'm not asking anybody to solve. All I'm asking for is what the lowest common denominator is. What is it? It's 35. So if we were finding the answer to that, we would convert both fractions to 35ths, like that. So the common denominator is 35. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a look at number 2, 3, and 4, and I want you to write down what you think the common denominator is. I'm not asking you to solve them. Only what you think the lowest common or least common denominator is. I'll give you about 45 seconds to do all three. So here's what typically happens in 6th grade. Some teachers teach you, well, you know what, if you don't see it, just multiply the denominators together. And while that will work, you are guaranteed that you will have to reduce almost every single time if you pick a bigger denominator than you need to. I say that because when I walked around, a couple of you had 48. 48 will work, but it's certainly not even close to the least common denominator. What is the least common denominator?
12.
It's 12. And that makes the numerator and denominator of your answer much, much smaller, which means you are less likely to make a mistake when you are simplifying. And that's what it's all about there. And most of you in here, I know, you can just take a look at number 2 and you know, yeah, 12 is the least common denominator. But how can you figure that out if you don't want to just multiply them? Well, start listing out multiples of 4, and this goes back to probably 5th grade, maybe even sooner than that, I'm not sure. But I'll list out some multiples of 4, and then I'll list out multiples of 10. It's referred to as the least common multiple because it's the smallest multiple that is common, and right there proves to you that 12 is the least common multiple. Therefore, that's really the denominator that you should use. You're less likely to make a mistake that way. All right, Stefan, how about number 3? What's the least common denominator?
24.
It is 24. Very good. A couple of you put 96 because you were told in the 6th grade, just multiply them together. That's not a good strategy in my opinion. And then how about number 4? Aiden?
I got 18.
It is 18. A couple of you put 54 because once again, you're not listening to what advice you're being given, you're just multiplying them together. And those are the same people who have a tendency to not simplify their fractions all the way. Okay, so just be careful with that. All right. If mixed numbers are in the problem, we need to make sure we convert to improper fractions first. I know all of you remember that because I've been putting mixed number problems in homework almost every single day from 5th and 6th grade since the first day of school. So, everybody try number 1. All right, so this one's very easy. We've been doing problems like this, once again, since the beginning of the year. We should convert 1 2/3 to 5/3, and 4/5 is already proper. Now we need to find a common denominator, which is 15. So the first fraction turns into 25 over 15. Second one turns into 12 over 15, and we really should not be doing this step yet. We really should be doing this step right here, so we're not making those common mistakes that I talked about when we had common denominators. But we should end up with a difference of 13/15. That one's easy. We don't have any negative numbers in there, but I believe all the rest of these will. So now let's go to number 2. Everybody try number 2. All right, so common denominator, or least common denominator, is 24. First fraction turns into 3 over 24. That's an equivalent fraction to 1/8. 5 over 24 turns into 20 over 24. That is an equivalent fraction of 5 over 6. This is a subtraction problem. And here is where some of you are just jumping straight from there to an answer, and you're writing 17 over 24. The answer is not 17 over 24, because here's what's happening. You're skipping the step that I asked you not to skip when we were dealing with common denominators. Do not skip that step right there. And then if you add the opposite, you should see that it is actually negative 17 over 24, not 17 over 24. Any questions with this one? So let me make a point one more time. Do not skip this step. All right, everybody try number 3. And that is a negative 7/8. All right, least common denominator number 3 is 8. I do not have to change the first one. Only the second one I change 3/4 to its equivalent fraction of 6/8. And now, do not skip this step. You are much less likely to make a mistake if you don't skip that step. Negative 7 plus 6 is negative 1. Therefore, the sum is negative 1/8. All right, let's go to number 4. Everybody try number 4. Okay, number 4. First thing I would do is add the opposite. So that turns this problem into a regular problem that you learned how to do in the 5th grade. 6 1/4 plus 1 3/5. Turn them both into improper fractions. Least common denominator is 20. So I will turn 25/4 into 125/20. 8/5 into 32/20. And now it becomes 157 over 20, which is 7 17/20. Any questions with number 4? All right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do number 5 and number 6, and we will shoulder partner both of those, number 5 and number 6. All right, so we find our common denominator, which is 12. Don't lose the negative symbol here, or here for that matter. That's a very common mistake. Don't lose the negative symbols. Negative 3/4 turns into negative 9/12. Negative 2/3 turns into negative 8/12. Do not skip this step. One more time. I went around helping a couple of people on both of these problems, and the people who were getting an incorrect answer were skipping that step right there. You're way less likely to make a mistake if you don't skip that step. That is negative 17 over 12, which is negative 1 5/12. Any questions with number 5? All right, how about number 6? Yes? All right, let's see if that is correct. You said negative 5 and 13/15 for the sum. Convert to improper fractions like this. And then at that point, it's just a regular problem, much like the last one. Common denominator is 15. And then we convert back to a mixed number after we get negative 88 over 15. So negative 5 and 13/15. Very good. All right, one more problem, and then we are finished. Everybody try number 7.
For number 7 is negative 11.28.
Negative 11/28. Let's see if that is correct. First mixed number turns into 7 over 4. Second one turns into 15 over 7. Common denominator is 28. And then do not skip that step right there. Probably should add the opposite for some of you. You still do that, and that's fine. But the difference in number 7 is negative 11 over 28. All right, we are finished for today.